Hey everyone, my name is Dawn, also known as Dragon Rider, and this is the first of many videos that I'll be putting out leading up to Fractured in Alterac Valley. I've done some theory crafting in the past, but I'm really going to expand upon that this time, and I'm even going to be playing some of these decks that I put together in the first couple of days after the expansion launches on my Twitch stream. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order, so today's video is going to be featuring Demon Hunter. So let's get in to these Demon Hunter decks. All right, so I put together two decks here that I want to talk about, and I'll also talk about a couple of different cards that I thought about putting in for each of the decks, or that I might slot in after a couple of games of the deck. We've got a few new tools, so let's kind of talk about the basics of this deck and some of the things that I chose and why I put them in here. So there's a lot of low cost things in the deck. It tops out at 6 mana. A lot of early minions to start getting on the board, putting on pressure, and a couple of new cards I included in here, but the biggest one that I'm kind of really interested to see, and I don't know if this card is going to be good or not, is this Ivis, the Forest Lord. So this is the 1/1 battle cry. Spend the rest of your mana and gain +2/+2 rush, divine shield, or taunt at random for each. That's kind of interesting. I don't know actually if this is going to guarantee give you, like, let's say you're on turn 5, you play this, you have 4 mana left, if it's going to give you all 4 of the other things, because I don't think that's how it works. I think it could possibly give you +2/+2, and then the next time maybe it's taunt, and then the third mana, maybe it's +2/+2 again. And then maybe the last mana is rush. I think that's how it works. So this one is going to be really interesting and one that might end up not actually being very good in this deck. But, Divine Shield, Rush, or some added stats for just a couple of mana seems pretty decent. And the thing that I really like about it is I think it's pretty flexible in the curve of this deck, where if you draw it early, maybe you can play it on turn 3 for just 2 benefits. Because the Demon Hunter hero power only costs 1, I feel like this kind of fits in a little bit easier with trying to maybe just hero power and then play this, or if I kind of top deck this later, that has a lot of potential stats and benefits that you can get from it. So I think it kind of fills in a lot of the awkward curve turns potentially. Again, maybe it doesn't fit very well. This is one that I'm really interested to try out, like we've seen in the past with decks like this. Still, again, going in on the early minions. You've got like the Battle Fiends, Mana Feeders, Wriggling Horrors to just kind of bolster your early game. And I've also got some weapons in here, including this new weapon, Dread Prison Glaive. I think is a really interesting weapon. Again, this one I'm not necessarily sold on, but I think for a deck that wants to be pushing face, you can either just send this damage face, or if you add attack with things like your Chaos Strike, Hero Power, Stilt Stepper damage, anything like that, you can trade into a big taunt. And if you're doing the amount of damage to kill that minion, then it's also going to go to their hero. So I really like the potential of this in this kind of face aggressive style deck. Then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of this choice of adding in hero card of Kurtrus. Kurtrus is a really interesting one to me. I mean, you get some minions right off the bat. They've got rush. Maybe you can clear up some stuff. This hero power of getting +2 attack and then refreshing after you have some minions attack. I mean, the basis of this deck is that you're already going to be putting on a lot of minion pressure. So if you can manage to actually play this on curve, then the next turn, you could potentially be closing out the game on turn 7. That's pretty good or pretty average for a more aggressive deck. If you're able to maybe even find this off of Skull, again, it's probably still going to be turn 7, 8, maybe 9, which still feels a little bit slow for a more aggressive deck. But if you can pull this off of Skull, then you actually could play this for a lot cheaper, and then you can maybe get some hero powers in. But this is going to kind of feel like a little bit of a closer or just that little bit of extra burst damage, but I do think the +2 attack is going to be fairly valuable, and even being able to just leave one minion on board and use this hero power twice is an extra 4 damage for 2 mana. So fantastic value if you can get it down and get to that point, and hopefully be closing out the game. Now, I want to talk about a couple of cards that I really considered when I was putting this deck together, and again, that I might swap in and out when I get to actually play it after the expansion launches. One of those is the Fellfire Dreadeye. So that's the 2 mana 2/3, and you get a cheaper hero power. Again, kind of fills in the curve. It's a decent body, and you get to, add that extra hero power, that extra damage on top of whatever else you're doing. And another one that is also new for Alterac Valley is Flag Runner. This 3 mana that has a pretty good health on it. And when you lose friendly minions, it's going to gain attack. This one I considered, but it still feels like it might be a little dependent. And ideally, with a deck like this, you're hoping that your minions aren't dying quite as often. They probably still are going to be dying, especially depending on kind of the meta. If there's a lot more decks that are fighting on board or clearing your minions with spells, maybe this could be okay. The 6 health is a decent break point. It might be a little bit more difficult for some decks to actually answer that, so you could get some use out of this. But again, this is another one I'm not quite sure if it's going to be fast enough or impactful enough to get great value off of it. So this is one that I considered, and I'm going to kind of see how the deck starts to feel and what I'm facing when the expansion launches. These more aggressive decks, you always like draw. There is already some draw in the deck. I put in some draw mechanics like Skull and the Acrobatics. But one thing that I did consider for draw is that Voracious Reader, which we've seen in the past. Again, kind of the same thinking as some of the other ones. I still think it might be a little bit too slow. And with a little bit heavier cards like Skull and the hero card that I'm running in the list, I think Voracious Reader might not quite be the draw mechanic that I'm looking for. Lastly, I did look at and consider Drekthar, just because he seems like such a great tool for aggressive decks. But the more you look at it, a lot of these minions actually have battle cries and things that I want to be using the battle cries for. And it just kind of felt a little bad. Like, this wouldn't quite be the fit that I'm looking for. Maybe in some sort of aggressive, more death rattle focused deck. But when I'm looking for the battle cries off of like the Wriggling Horror or Mankrik or Stilt Stepper, I really don't want to be just pulling those out of my deck. Sometimes the aggressive decks are very popular at the beginning, but I'm not sure how this one is going to feel. All right, and now to talk about the second deck that I put together. This one feels a little bit of a hybrid deck. I've heard a lot of people kind of talking about potentially doing demons and big demons. I've seen people mentioning token, and I thought, let's put them together. So, yes, this deck looks a little weird. It's kind of a big demon type deck, but there's actually a lot of token style generation and just creating bodies early to mid game with spells. And some of them ended up kind of putting out multiple minions. So I thought, with the new card, Urzul Giant, let's get some token stuff in here along with these big demons and see how this goes. Try to actually create boards and keep pressure going throughout the game. I think it can be very flexible, and a couple of the things that are really kind of key for this deck and kind of work together are things like flanking maneuver. I mean, summon a 4/2 demon with rush, and if it dies this turn, summon another one. You could get so many things here, and it can trade into multiple minions. You can use these to trade and kill off multiples to work through divine shields or bigger minions. I feel like this card is fantastic and is going to be a mid-game point to really help you continue with getting things on the board and getting things killed off. Then kind of one of the other pivotal things that I'm looking at in this deck, the new Demon Hunter Legendary, Carry a Fell Soul. Now, she transforms into a 6/6 copy of a demon in your deck. So I really stuck with just the bigger demons. I wasn't really sold on any of the smaller demons. There are some smaller ones, but I didn't really like them as much. I wanted to stick with kind of this bigger demon. So the Urzel giant is a demon as well, so it might just be a 6/6 body just there. But the other ones that create a lot of value end up being the pit commander that at the end of the turn will pull something, another big demon out of the deck. The Moarg Forge Fiend for a 6/6 taunt with a death rattle that gives you a bunch of armor, or potentially a 6/6 copy of the Imprisoned Ancien that's going to be dormant and then wake up and deal a bunch of damage. Still a threat, your opponent can't really interact with it, but I definitely think there is a lot of potential with her there and a lot of kind of different directions you could take it. But I'm really interested to see how good she ends up being with some of these big demons. Now, the one that I'm kind of debating if I really want to keep in this list or not is actually the Derailed Coaster. So again, going with the kind of tokeny style thinking, I put this in thinking, okay, it's just another mid game thing. It's the only 5 drop in the deck, and it could just help kind of fill in that mid game, hopefully to work towards those big demons. And there's a decent chunk of minions in the deck, but there's also a lot of spells too. So I'm not sure if this is going to end up getting the value that I hope for, just because there are again there's some weapons and a lot of spells and a little bit of draw type of stuff here. I've got the Tusk Piercer that can draw into the Persistent Peddler, which if one ends up that I have to play out or it gets out on board, then it can pull the other one. But that will mostly be for the tradable effect to kind of cycle through the deck a little bit and hopefully find things that I'm really looking for. That is also kind of the other thing that maybe isn't necessary, or maybe in place of the weapon and the peddler, I could put in actual draw cards. This is a great time. Let me talk about the cards that I also considered for the deck. And one of those things is a more draw mechanic. So Spectral Sight or Acrobatics, maybe Skull as well. The downside that I could see there is having these big demons kind of stuck in your hand, and you don't maybe get as many chances to play out a skull for the discount value. That could be a possibility as well. But I do think that the draw mechanics, the draw spells might be okay, especially in place of things like that Tusk Piercer and the Peddlers potentially, maybe even instead of the Derailed Coasters. And a couple other cards that I would consider as well would be healing/removal cards. So Chaos Leech or Eye Beam, you can definitely get value from those, even if they're not outcasted. And especially depending on the meta, some removals, some healing, it seems pretty good. You could put that in there again to kind of help get to that later game and build up to more of the game plan that you're going for with the demons. Another interesting one as well is the Warden of Chains for a mid-game taunt, with the potential upside because this list is running the bigger demons. You could get an additional +1/+2 on this mid-game taunt. Maybe that ends up being good enough. Maybe it's a little too slow. I could see maybe running that instead of the Derailed Coasters, or again, maybe over Persistent Peddlers. And again, depending on the meta, a decent mid-game taunt might be enough to kind of slow down some pressure from your opponent's deck. Another card, and the last card I'll talk about that I kind of looked at including is Expendable Performers. And that is because it puts out a bunch of 1/1s with Rush. So it's creating a ton more of those tokens, getting things to die, to make those the giant cheaper. The thing that I was really hesitant with is it is 7 mana. Maybe it's there. I think if there is, it's just one. I think I would include one copy, but I'm not completely sold on it because having to pay the 7 mana does feel a little bit slow. It feels a little better with the Fell Guardians because that's going to discount by the time that I would be able to get that in my hand. I should be able to play it much earlier than turn 7, whereas Expendable Performers, I would have to wait until turn 7. And I think these other tools are just going to end up being more consistent and a little bit more flexible with when you can play them and still get the token stuff out. So let me know what you think of these decks, if you've created anything like these, or even if you're going to take these a different direction. I'm trying to kind of create new stuff. I'm sure there's still going to be some decks like Quest Demon Hunter that are still around. Maybe it uses a new one or two cards or something, but I'm trying to create some new decks that aren't just the same things we've been playing. So let me know what you think of these decks in the comments below. And in the description, I will have the deck codes and the links if you want to look at these decks for yourself as well. And, when the expansion comes out, if you end up trying these or a slight variation or something, let me know how it works for you. I'd love to hear that. So let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking this out. And again, every day up until the expansion is going to be a different class. We're doing 10 days of decks. If you haven't already, I would love to have you be a part of the community. You could subscribe, thumbs up the video so that more people can also check it out. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to see even more of the content that I do, check out any of these videos over on the side.